First, I want to say how privileged I am to have been invited to present this award to Dr. Alan Carlin, who exemplifies the kind of activity that we want to see in our federal government service today, except we don't see it. A little bit about myself first. Who am I? A longtime federal employee. My cause was fighting crime for 30 years, including my tour of duty in the U.S. House and Senate and the White House. I was also fighting crime there to the extent my agency would let me. I left the agency in 1995 because, like Dr. Carlin, my agency and the White House was asking me to do something that I just could not do. They were asking me to lie, and I wouldn't do it, and so I left. And I published a book about my experiences in the White House, and I was rewarded with a New York Times #1 bestseller because I did that. But it also alerted me to the uphill battle a whistleblower or a person who wants to bring the truth forward faces in whatever career they have chosen, in this case the federal government. They have so many different ways to discourage whistleblowing or telling the truth. And at the same time, as I was talking to Dr. Carlin earlier, the federal government spends billions of dollars to find the most honest, the most dedicated, hardworking people they can possibly find to hire, and then they immediately get to work corrupting them. It's the most amazing thing. We're at the whims of the political class quite often. Executive branch runs the agencies, obviously. Well, enough about me. We decided over the course of the years to help whistleblowers, usually at the federal level, and for the last nearly 20 years, that's what we have done as an organization. The organization I'm president of today is Don't Tread on My Business. The organization I ran until Lois Lerner caught me doing something, I'm not sure what, was Patrick Henry Center for Individual Liberty. And that's how you might know me, by that name. I learned about Dr. Carlin through a good friend of yours, Harlan Moody, who introduced me to Heartland Institute. And I have the privilege to meet some of the folks at Heartland. I'm very impressed by the work that they are doing. And I had a chance to talk to Dr. Carlin about his example. His background is amazing, and you'll find a little bit of a bio in the program if you'll look through that. And the short version of his bio is that in the 60s, he was an activist. He was involved in direct action, a technique we've heard about this morning, how effective that can be. He was in direct action to prevent the building of some dams in California, which were believed to be very injurious to the environment. After that, he took a position with Rand Corporation in Santa Monica, California, and he was also chairman of the country's second largest Sierra Club branch in California, which I think says a lot about his activism. So he's a very active man, involved in the environment all of his working life. He later took a job at the EPA, where he retired from after running into a wall of criticism and outright abuse from the agency that he had worked so dedicatedly over the course of years to produce virtually hundreds of papers. He met his match when the agency, the EPA, asked him to write a complimentary paper to support their policy in 2009 that was moving towards a cap-and-trade policy scenario. And he didn't find the science that would support the agency's position. And so he was asked to write a paper by his superiors, and so he did. He wrote a 100-page document which basically said, I can't find the justification for these policies here. This is the science. This is what I've looked at, and many people agree with me, but there just doesn't seem to be the justification for this sort of extreme policy change. He was very smart about his work in that he emailed various people around the EPA draft copies of the paper as it went forward from draft to draft. And I think that was a great thing to do, because after he had finished the paper and it was summarily rejected by his superiors, which of course put him in the doghouse immediately, somebody, presumably in the EPA, sent a draft copy of his 100-page document to the Competitive Enterprise Institute, who promptly released it to the news media. And then it really became very troubling for the doctor to continue to work at the EPA. Here's what they did. The typical response to a whistleblower is to, first of all, remove all responsibility from that person, regardless of their background, and then they gave him a do-nothing job. They couldn't fire him. They didn't have cause to do it. But they instructed him to stay away from all media and to do no further research. Can you imagine this? Do no more research on the concept of climate change, because we don't like your opinion, we don't like your paper. And we don't want you talking to the media or anybody else about this. Presumably, we don't want you talking to your coworkers. And this wouldn't be such of a problem to him because many of his coworkers then shunned him. So the handwriting was on the wall. He had enough time in to retire, and he did. Now, what happened as a result of the publication of this document? A 100-page long, scientifically based document, in many ways resonated in Washington, D.C. at the precise moment when Congress was being asked to push through a cap-and-trade bill. Regrettably, the House actually did pass their version of a bill. Very sad situation, isn't it? Some of our Republican friends helped get that done. But then the Senate, in the face of the information in part from Dr. Carlin, took a look at the issue, and they said, you know what, I don't think we have the votes. And so it was tabled, and it was submerged, and that's the last we heard about it until now. But so we bought ourselves a great deal of time, thanks to Dr. Carlin's courage. And he knew what he was doing. He knew this would end his career and would cause him a lot of grief from his peer group. He did it knowingly. But he said to me earlier today, he said, you know, Gary, he said, I had a 40-year career of telling the truth and dedicating myself to environmental issues, and it was all on the line, and for what? He said, what I saw was a policy that not only had absolutely no value to it at all, because it was based on a fraud, but he said it also had the potential for great harm to our economy and into our very lives. And he said, so I wouldn't lie, and I knew at the moment I submitted the paper that that was the end of my career. Dr. Carlin, I wish you would come up here now and take some time to...
Thank you, and I am highly appreciative both of your kind words and the great honor that I'm about to receive. And I would like to thank everybody involved. I don't know entirely who all they are, but it obviously involves quite a number of people. Unfortunately, I was not successful in changing the so-called endangerment finding. That had been decided early on in the Obama administration, and it was and is the legally operative statement by EPA as to the science. This is no longer an issue within EPA. I must emphasize that. It really doesn't matter in terms of EPA's action whether someone can prove without a doubt that CO2 has no effect on the climate. The choice has been made, it's been reviewed by the courts, and the science is as they say it is for regulatory purposes. I have just completed a book about how I believe the environmental movement has lost its way from a legal, journalistic, economic, governmental, and scientific viewpoint. If there are people in the room who have some ideas how I might find a good publisher for this work, I'd be most interested. Okay, the endangerment finding, which was issued in very late 2009, just by chance, of course, just before the big Copenhagen meeting, has now led to the issuance of regulations as to how much CO2 can be emitted by power plants in each state. These proposed regulations are worse than I ever expected, and I didn't have high hopes. First of all, in my view, they are clearly illegal. The Clean Air Act says that EPA may not do what they have done. Whether or not the courts will approve that remains to be seen. Secondly, the regulations, in effect, try to impose the various provisions of the Waxman-Markey bill. They attempt mainly to force what I call the red states into expensive, market-distorting preferences, which are very expensive. In my opinion, this will ultimately result in electric grid instability, higher costs for homeowners and industries, and will particularly hit the lower income groups. What EPA has effectively done is to rewrite parts of the Clean Air Act without consulting Congress and ignoring the Constitution. Speaker Boehner recognizes the problem in the environmental and various other areas. He calls it aggressive unilateralism. I call it dictatorial. This is a growing problem with regard to the current administration. But if the people represented here wish to influence the outcome, they've got a lot of work to do. According to one recent poll, the regulations are supported by 69% of those polled. and opposed only by 27%. And I must emphasize that unless something changes, these regulations will become effective. Okay, well, I'm not anxious to see that happen, but there are only 3 groups at this point who can do much about it. One is the President, one is the Congress, and the third is the courts. I don't think that the current occupant of the White House will be doing much. Congress remains to be seen, especially as a result of the upcoming elections. And the major question is the courts. Will the courts throw these regulations out, as I believe they should? And how can we encourage them to do so? It is my view that this issue is really important, and I believe we must not fail. The country's future, both economic and environmental, is at risk, and perhaps even more important, the future rule of law. Thank you.